Summer is here, and with it, you likely have spent time near water, a local lake, pond, or river, which means you have also undoubtedly watched the aerial antics of dragonflies. But did you know that dragonflies live dual lives? Their young are aquatic and then transform into a colorful flying adult. Wander with us and discover this unique life cycle that spans across both land and water.
Welcome to The Wandering Naturalist, a Three Rivers Park District podcast.
I'm Angela, a wildlife biologist at Three Rivers Park District.
And I'm Brandon, an interpretive naturalist for Three Rivers Park District.
Three Rivers Park District manages over 27,000 acres of parklands in suburban Hennepin County and surrounding areas.
Join us as we wander from park to park and discuss the stories of the past, the nature in our present, and how these have shaped our parks.
Come explore with us, The Wandering Naturalist. So I might have a bit of a bias here, Brandon.
Yeah, I had a feeling when we planned this podcast that you would have a little bit of a bias.
I absolutely love and adore dragonflies. I don't know if you know this about me, but I am part of a nonprofit group that actually focuses just on dragonflies.
You've mentioned it once or twice in our conversations,
and even in the podcast, probably.
When I've come to you for dragonfly advice, you may have dropped that hint.
Yes. So yeah, these dragonflies are just these fascinating creatures. And this wasn't something that I grew up with. It wasn't anything that I've had a long history. It's more kind of new to my life being interested in dragonflies.
So what got you interested in dragonflies if it's a new thing?
Yeah, so there's an actual day. I can pinpoint a particular day in my career.
Can you give me the date and the time?
No, I just know it was summer out. We were in the prairie. So I was a wildlife seasonal, and often a lot of our days take us out into the prairies to spot spray invasive species.
Okay.
So we have to kind of meander and wander through the prairies looking for different invasives. And we have our buckets, and we're walking along, and we had a newer seasonal that had joined us this year, Kurt. You know Kurt.
I do know Kurt. He's an amazing person.
And all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, he kind of like drops his bucket, takes off running, like kind of says something. I don't even, like saddles something, and then he just takes off running. And I'm kind of alarmed, like, should I be running?
Well, yeah, when you see a wildlife biologist run, you might want to run too.
So I was kind of
Usually that means like ground wasps or something.
Yeah, is there a bee? Is there something chasing him? It was just kind of this really like, moment that stuck out in my head. I wasn't sure how to react, but just stand there and kind of be, curious. So he finally comes back. He's panting. He didn't catch whatever it was he was going. I should mention he had a net in the hand, too.
Well, we normally do have nets. I mean, how can you go anywhere without a net?
You have to go a net everywhere. So he comes back, and he's kind of like, getting oxygen back into him finally. And then I realize I have that moment to be like, what are you doing? What were you just chasing after?
So what got him so excited if it wasn't a stinging creature?
So it was a dragonfly.
Okay, those are worth getting excited for.
So he responds, it was a black saddlebags. It was a county record.
Really?
And I was kind of, a county record? I mean, how many dragonflies are there? I was just kind of like, who cares? Like, isn't there just, I figured there were just a few.
Yeah.
And then he explained that there was, well over like 130, 140 dragonflies.
And that's just in Minnesota, right?
And just in Minnesota. But the other interesting thing of why he was so excited is because there was this project he was volunteering for. I believe he heard about it through Master Naturalist, about surveying the whole state at a county level to figure out what dragonflies are here. Because it was kind of a big question mark.
Yeah, we really didn't know, did we?
We didn't have a really good species list or distribution known about Minnesota. We kind of joke about it now and call it the Minnesota-shaped hole of dragonfly data. There was good records in other neighboring states, but not in Minnesota. So he was on this quest to help fulfill that survey by getting different species added to different county lists. So this black saddlebags was like a really big, exciting thing because it hadn't been documented.
And had he caught it?
And no, he didn't. He
didn't
catch
it got away. I'm assuming he caught it later.
So he could have been totally yanking my leg and making something up. But at that moment, it just kind of clicked with me.
It sounds like it was like a transformative moment.
It was a very transformative moment of just, I didn't know much about dragonflies, but just that adventure that I saw him just partake in front of my eyes was enough to kind of be like, well, I I want to run and try to catch it.
Well,
That competitive side of me of like, I can get it.
I love birds and bird watching, but you don't get to chase birds with nets. That's generally frowned upon.
Yeah.
So catching these dragonflies and holding them in hand, no binoculars involved, that does sound pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's just something that makes you kind of feel like a kid again, being able to swing a net, be curious.
Well, and that's kind of what got me into dragonflies, as I've mentioned, just a few times before. I'm from South Florida, and I grew up across from a swamp, which was exciting because in the summer my mom would hand us nets and turn us loose, and we would go and we'd chase dragonflies, and we would catch the red ones and the black ones and the green ones. But there was always this white one that we couldn't catch. And I'm pretty sure now, looking back, that it was a common whitetail. But at the time, for me and my brothers, because we couldn't catch it, anytime we get near it, it would dart into the swamp, which in Florida, you don't just walk into swamps because, there's like water moccasins and things like that.
Yeah, dangerous wildlife.
Exactly. So that, was off limits then. And we'd be like, oh, we missed it. And so for us and for every summer after that dragonfly or, any dragonfly we saw that was white like that was our Moby Dick.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I still remember Moby Dick. We never caught Moby Dick.
Have you caught one since because they're here in Minnesota, too?
I have caught a few since, but it's not the same because it was like in the prairie, which I love running through the prairie, but there was not that like off limits. Oh, no, I can't go get it. There's no danger involved of alligators. Exactly. But it probably actually was until I started working for Three Rivers, though, that I started realizing, there's different species. And it's again, I am not nearly as involved as you are, but I do love going out there and catching them and seeing what they are because it's a puzzle. Some are easy. You can identify them on the fly if it's ebony jewelwing or if it's the green darner. But some, like the little bluet damselflies,
the smaller
they're
one.
like a puzzle because you need a microscope or a magnifying lens. You got to hope it's a male, at least for me, because I can't identify females. I can sometimes identify the males. You match up their claspers with a picture, and so I like that puzzle aspect of it.
Yeah, it's just something about having it in hand. And you mentioned that with like birding. Like I would say I'm a birder, but for me it's harder. Like I want to be able to have something in hand and then really look through a field guide and have that time to be able to solve the puzzle of what is it.
Absolutely. And I love birding, like I said, but binoculars are not my friend.
No,
so I'd rather use a net and hold it.
By the time you get the binoculars up, the bird's gone or you can't find your spot again. But back to this magic of what makes dragonflies so unique and why they are a podcast topic today is we need to clarify something first, which you already said, the word damselfly.
Yes, because everybody, you bring up damselfly, like, I've never heard of a damselfly, I've never seen it. Chances are you have.
Especially if you've gone fishing. I find like the little bluets that land on your fishing pole when you're at the lake, those are a damselfly. So when we say we like dragonflies, Dragonfly Society, we're actually lumping in there damselflies as well. It's just, doesn't roll off the tongue to always repeatedly say dragonfly and damselflies. But most people seem to relate to dragonfly, but they're all in that same order of odonatates.
And what does odonatates mean?
So that means toothed ones.
Okay.
So if you've ever looked up at one close with like a magnifying glass or under a microscope, you will see that they have incredible, powerful jaws.
And it doesn't matter if you're a dragonfly or a damselfly, you've got those jaws.
Right.
And to help people maybe picture it a little bit more, the way I like to think about it are dragonflies have thick abdomens. They fly in a straight line. And when they land, their wings are spread out. Damselflies are the dragonflies you've seen that fold their wings behind their back when they've landed.
Right.
And we'll put some pictures of dragonflies and damselflies up on our Facebook page.
Yeah, it's a really good place to start if you're really new to learning about dragonflies. Again, over 140 some species is a lot of things to learn, but just being able to say, hey, that's a dragonfly or that's a damselfly. That wing is a big thing. Also, just the size. Damselflies are much smaller. There's always exceptions to the rules. So there's a damselfly that actually holds its wings out partially at an angle. Spread wings, hence their name. And they're probably one of my favorites.
They're very beautiful.
Yes.
So now we know dragonfly, damselfly, that's what we're talking about today. But why did you want to do this, Angela? Because you kind of were like, oh, we should totally do dragonflies. And I agree. But what were some of the things that you thought would be really interesting to include in this?
Well, I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about dragonflies. There's a lot of folklore or people hear something buzzing and they immediately think, oh my God, bad, get it away from me. There's just kind of this reaction to insects in general that I feel like there's a lack of appreciation just because of a lack of understanding. So if we can get some people curious and to better understand them, I'm hoping that'll bring some bigger awareness to this wildlife that's maybe not looked at as much as some of the other bigger macrofauna stuff that in our world.
I like it. And then we've got some special guests to help us with that too, right?
Yep, we have some really great guests this podcast. Mitch, he is a wildlife specialist with us, and he has worked really closely with me on some of the Minnesota Dragonfly Society projects.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun to talk to.
Yeah, and then also Amy is joining us, and she is someone that I've met through the Dragonfly Society as well, and she's doing some research within Three Rivers Parks on a particular species of dragonfly.
And I know that I have used her curriculum book. She's written a lot for a lot of my dragonfly classes that I teach. So I'm really excited to talk to her more in depth because I've met her a few times. It's great to talk to her, but I mostly know her through her book because it's been incredibly helpful.
So I think they'll give us some really cool perspectives on some of the current stuff going on with dragonflies as well, too. But before we can dive into that stuff, I think it's really important to talk about maybe some of the biology and interesting facts about dragonflies before we bring our guests in.
All right, let's do it.
So there's a lot of places we can go with this. One of the things I like to start with is just how old dragonflies are. And we're not talking like how long they live.
Also, I was going to say they're like 2 months old, but that's not what you're getting at?
No, so like 300 million years ago.
That's a long time.
We had dragonflies.
That's like before the dinosaurs.
Exactly. And they were much different than they are. Well, not much different, but size-wise, they were different.
Well, there's a lot more oxygen in the atmosphere. So as I understand it, all arthropods like insects and arachnids could be a lot bigger back then.
Yeah, so we're talking like a 3-foot wingspan.
That's pretty impressive.
I'm just trying to picture that, and that's a little scary.
Yeah, that's like the size of my toddler. I don't think I would want a dragonfly that big flying around nowadays.
No, I think it'd be a cool thing to see, but I don't know how well I would deal with that now.
So 3 feet is huge. Do we have any dragonflies that even come close to that nowadays?
No, I'd say now most modern dragonflies have a wingspan of only like 2 to 5 inches. Our largest one is the dragon hunter.
Ooh, I love the dragon hunter. Now, is it called the dragon hunter because it hunts other dragonflies?
It does, yeah, it will.
Okay. Like, is that where the name... I've always wondered where the name comes from.
You know, I'm not 100%... I would assume so,
okay.
But I'm not 100% sure on... there's a whole book on, like, the naming of dragonflies, so I can't think of the name of the book right now. But I'm sure it's out there of how it did get its name, but it's also been documented to take down hummingbirds.
I have actually seen that. So when I worked for Voyageurs National Park, I was walking up to a hotel. It was nicknamed the Tilton Hilton because it was built without a foundation, so it was Tilton. And anyways, I'm walking up to it. I see this thing kind of hovering above the hotel, and then this thing just shoots across the sky and hits into it, and both of them fall onto the roof of this hotel and roll into the ground. And I run up. I'm like, what is going on? I just start hearing meep, meep. And I go and I look, and there's this hummingbird that is just like trying to buzz, and it can't take off because a dragon hunter is collapsed onto it.
Yeah.
And in the dragon hunter, I'm pretty sure was going to eat it. Unfortunately, before I got all the way up to it, somebody came and they kind of kicked the dragonfly to free the hummingbird, and the hummingbird just took off, and the dragonfly kind of like sat there for a minute. And I'm not sure what I was thinking. I imagined something like I was going to eat like a king.
Yeah.
And no, I'm not. And then it flew off in the other direction.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine that's a rare opportunity for something like a dragon hunter. But it just gives you an appreciation of their size.
Oh, it was amazing. I used to see whole flocks of them. And I always loved seeing them because they came out right when the midges and mosquitoes did. And so it was great because I just watch them eat them. But seeing them go after that hummingbird is, I think that's one of my favorite memories I have being out in the wild.
That's a cool one.
It was just amazing.
That's not something that most people see.
No.
And I don't think it's very typical of the dragon hunters to do that, but...
No, they're not going to take out our hummingbird population. We don't have to worry about that. But it was just such a unique thing. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, and the real magic, personally for me with these insects, is their life cycle. So I feel like we really have to talk about that. There's a reason when in summer you notice them whizzing around. They live near water for a reason. Their young are aquatic, and they require water to complete their life cycle, which is not a lot of people connect dragonflies directly to living in water. That's
one of my favorite things to teach is that if we want to go find a baby dragonfly, we have to go into the pond.
Yeah, and that just blows people's minds. They're huh? What?
It's amazing. So how does that work? How do they start their life underwater?
So dragonflies and damselflies undergo what's called incomplete metamorphosis. So we often hear metamorphosis when we're talking about the monarch butterfly.
Absolutely. You got your egg, you've got your larva, which is the caterpillar, you've got the pupa, which is the chrysalis, and then that emerges and you get a beautiful butterfly.
So yes, so that's 4 stages. Mm-hmm. And then the dragonfly is 3 stages. So that's where the incomplete metamorphosis.
Because they don't have a pupa.
Correct. So it goes a little something like this. So we're going to talk about incomplete metamorphosis.
Okay.
Which is not the nature word of the podcast. Be patient. So what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, if you're a biologist, you know that the egg came first because random mutations lead to new offspring. So obviously the egg came first.
Yeah, so that's where we're going to start. Mated dragonflies deposit their eggs in, on, or near water, depending on the species.
Okay.
So some species even deposit their eggs by inserting them into plant tissue.
How do they do that?
So the females have an ovipositor.
Okay, so that's like a tube that they can lay their eggs with.
Correct. And so some of these have been modified so they can cut vegetation open and insert the eggs.
So is she actually is she laying it in vegetation above the water?
It can be a little bit of both, I believe. Some people have witnessed this, or there's videos out there showing like the female actually like diving into the water, going underwater. Sometimes the male will push her underwater as well. Really, the mating behavior of dragonflies is fascinating and something anyone can sit at a pond and witness.
How can they fly after going underwater?
Their wings are just this amazing thing. I mean, that's why you can touch and hold a dragonfly too.
Okay.
Like, it doesn't affect them to touch and handle their wings. So the water just doesn't do any damage.
That's amazing. So they're going underwater or being pushed underwater, and then they're slicing over the plant and laying their eggs?
Yeah. And again, sometimes they can do this by just perching on vegetation and just their abdomen going into the water. So it's not... I mean, I have seen it, but I'd say it's more common that they're doing it above the water.
And I suppose each species has its own strategy. They're not all being pushed underwater by the males. Okay.
Yep. All different. So now we've got this whole egg thing done. Now, step 2, the egg hatches. Mm-hmm. And this can vary greatly depending on the species. Again, some can hatch in a few days, while others, the eggs overwinter and hatch that following spring into their larval form, which is a nymph.
And a nymph is a general term I think we use for any insect that goes through incomplete metamorphosis.
Yeah, so you'll hear things like larval or something else, but we just use that nymph.
Yep. Okay. And the nymph then is going to be the one that lives underwater.
Yes.
And what is it doing underwater then?
So it's going to go through different molts, just like other insects do.
Okay.
But it's going to be, again, it depends on the species. Some are going to be hidden under a substrate. Some are going to be, out and about. Some will be at, more at the top or under things like rocks or maybe under a cut bank. So they kind of all live and exist in different worlds, but they are a very ferocious predator, even in that nymph form.
Yeah, so they're hunting underwater, right? Mm-hmm. And I've heard that some of the larger, like darner nymphs, when they get big enough, they can even start hunting small fish.
Yep, minnows, tadpoles, one another.
Okay, yeah.
Darners especially. Like when we have darner nymphs, we know we can't keep them in the same container because they'll devour one another.
Well, and don't they hunt by shooting their jaw out to grab food?
Yeah, this is like a true alien kind of moment thing where it's like you would have a whole other set of hands to eat like a cheeseburger much more efficiently.
Well, and it shoots out faster than we can see with our eyes.
Yeah, so we'll post some videos of this on YouTube. There's some really great videos that slow it down so you can really see it. And they have kind of like these hooks at the end.
That's awesome.
Too, that can really just hook into their prey and then, it shoots out and brings it back to their mouth and away they devour.
That's amazing. Now, how are they breathing? Because the adults breathe above the water.
So in there's different tactics for dragonflies and damselflies. This is one thing that'll separate them underwater is the damselflies have external gills, and they actually will kind of use that to swim as well. So you'll see them kind of do like more of this fishy movement for swimming.
When I describe them to kids, I say that they swim like mermaids.
Yeah, that's a good way.
And so if they find Ariel in their cup, they found a damselfly.
That's a damselfly.
Yep.
So that back part is their external gills.
Okay, it looks like 3 feathers coming out.
Yep. And for dragonflies, it's actually, again, more with how they move too. So they kind of shoot water out of their back end there, and that is also them breathing. So they're breathing through their butt.
Yes. And so when you say back end, you mean rectum or
their butt, yeah.
Yep, because the gills are inside of it. And so my understanding is like if a predator comes at them, they can suck water into the rectum, squirt it out really fast to shoot across the pond and kind of get away.
Yeah.
Or not across the whole pond, but a little ways. So to me, that seems kind of like the rocket butt powered. And they're breathing that way too.
Yes.
And our friend Kurt, he did research on this because I think he was really curious.
Here comes the ballistic defecation story.
Yes, and sadly, this is not the podcast word of the day either. But ballistic defecation is what he told me about, and I thought it was amazing because he was curious, how can they breathe through their rectum and also poop from their rectum?
Yeah, it doesn't sound enjoyable at all.
And so he set up tanks, and he spent lots of time observing.
There's like papers on it.
And so it sounds like what happens when they eat, they actually shed the lining of their intestines around the waste that they can't digest. So it makes a nice little package. And then they forcibly eject it. And I can't remember the distances he told me for a dragonfly nymph. He told me that if the humans had the equivalent range when they go to the bathroom, it would be something like when you poop, you would shoot it over the top of a water tower and almost across the entire distance of a football field.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And when Kurt tells this story, I mean, you have to be like, you have to see it in person because he just gets so animated when telling this story, especially to kids, and the kids' eyes just like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever.
I think it's the coolest thing ever.
It's like, oh,
it's
hey,
amazing.
whatever it takes to have some love for dragonflies, ballistic defecation.
How many times do you get to use the terms ballistic and defecation together and have it be scientific?
Yeah, no, that is a good perk.
All right, so they're living underwater, they're eating, they're ballistic defecating, they're breathing, and then eventually after, I think it depends on the species, but you told me up to 3 years some of them are underwater?
Even longer than that.
Really?
Yeah, so something like the dragon hunter, which is much larger when you think of it as the adult, could take a little bit longer, and this really does depend on some variables, and Amy will talk about that because she's been researching some of this stuff, like how does a dragonfly grow, what are the factors, so things like sunlight, temperature, the habitat that they're in, predator present, they can live, some of them up to 7 years in water.
That's amazing. But they only live for a couple of months as adults.
Yeah, months. And that's always interesting, too, because I think some people think they might only live days, but they can live months. And most dragonflies aren't going to die of old age. Most likely they're going to end up in the stomach of a predator, whether it's a bird or a frog or something like that, or another dragonfly.
So they really spend most of their life underwater then.
Yeah.
So what we think of as a dragonfly is really just the very smallest amount of its
small sliver of its life.
That's amazing.
So we've kind of covered this whole fun aquatic world, which...
Yeah, so how do they then go from aquatic to aerial?
Yes, so this can get really scientific, and we'll keep it as general as possible, because again, I'm not big on the getting crazy into the science of it all here, but it's a transformation. So they're going to come out of the water to emerge as an adult. So they can travel different distances, and you've probably noticed this by... if you go to your cabin or if you're anywhere near a pond and you look up in trees or maybe on a dock or even at bridges is another good place to look. You'll kind of see these like weird, crunchy, looks like a dragonfly nymph, but it's empty.
Yep. It's like it's almost like they've just left their skin behind.
Yes. And that is their exuvia, which is our nature word of the podcast.
Finally. Yeah, I've been waiting I don't know how long for it now. All right, so exuvia is our nature word.
Yep.
That's what the loon call means, I suppose. So can you explain that then?
Yeah, so exuvia, good Scrabble word here because it has an X in it.
Triple word score.
EXUVIA. Use it in Scrabble, I dare ya. So this is something too, like everyone's probably seen this and maybe they're not as familiar with dragonflies, but think of something like we call them sand or dirt dragons, the cicada.
Okay. Yep.
So in the summer, you hear all those cicadas making noises, and in your yard or somewhere on a sidewalk, you'll see the kind of crunchy stuff left over.
Yeah.
So that's an exuvia.
So it's the skin that they've left.
Yep.
Their exoskeleton that they've shed so they can get bigger or they can change from a nymph to an adult.
And again, we always have to get the Latin. What is the Latin in here? And so exura means to remove, strip off. So that's what exuvia essentially means, is you're kind of shedding, stripping off a layer from the body.
Makes sense. So how exactly do they go about that process of leaving behind their exuvia?
So they're going to crawl out. Again, some of them will go different distances. Some will even do it like right on a lily pad. They'll transform. Really? They'll crawl out right on the lily pad. And it's really interesting to see. They break open the back. You'll be able to see their wing pads, and especially as they mature. It looks
like a little backpack.
It's like a little backpack. And so there's their wing their actual wings kind of all scrunched up. And so they're going to break out of there. They're going to pump themselves out. This process can take about an hour for the complete transformation of it to come out of its skin and turn into an adult. And it's going to pump its insect blood. So it pumps up the wings. They kind of unfold from that backpack and turn into the elegant, shiny wings. They'll be very shiny at this stage, which is their tendril stage. They're very vulnerable. They're like soft, warm butter. They're just very likely for predators, or if you were to come around and touch one, it could really damage them.
Their exoskeleton hasn't hardened yet.
Right. They're very soft and vulnerable. So, yeah, that takes about an hour, and then they're going to fly.
And that's where we really like them. Because as young, they're eating like mosquito bait larvae and other things like underwater. But as adults, they eat the adult mosquitoes and flies too. And my understanding is they're incredibly accurate predators.
Right. So this is something, again, that I don't think most people would equate with a dragonfly or with insects in general, but they are the most efficient animal when it comes to hunting.
Well, they have these massive eyes. Like, that's a defining characteristic is their eyes. So they can see
Almost
and process
360.
where the food is. And when I looked into it, most hunters are very inaccurate. You know, you talk about like a lion, which is the king of the
A
jungle.
lot of failure.
Like, maybe it'll get its prey 2 or 3 out of 10 times. But a dragonfly will get its prey 9 out of 10 times when they've studied it.
Yeah, it's like a 90% success rate.
That's amazing. I mean, it's like getting an A. That's incredible.
They are the kings and queens of the predator world.
And they eat a lot of different insects.
Yeah, they're very opportunistic. And if you can sit and watch them, so if you have a bunch of gnats or mosquitoes buzzing around you in the summer and you keep noticing a dragonfly getting really close to you, it's picking them right off. And you can actually kind of sit and watch as they grab them right out of the air. And they have like sticky kind of hairs on their legs, and that really allows them to grab it. And they're just, that flight ability allows them to just really maneuver better than any other insect in the world.
It makes you really appreciate the fact that they're small and that we don't have enough oxygen to get them back to prehistoric sizes.
Right, to that 3-foot wingspan.
Yep, that's amazing. Well, I'm very excited to dive into this some more. And so I think in our next segment, we're going to be talking to Mitch Hagg. And what is he going to be talking to us about?
So he is going to talk to us a little bit about what you could see here in the park. So what kind of habitats would be the best for going and seeing dragonflies, and how do we connect them to habitats? So again, our curiosity is always a fun thing to, pursue, but there is a reason that we should be keeping track of dragonflies. And he's going to talk a little bit about how that equates to habitats. And especially here in Minnesota, we're the land of 10,000 lakes. We have lots of wetlands and unique habitat for dragonflies.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to hearing from him.